Good morning or good afternoon, depending on when you're listening to this. My name's Jonathan Norman from the Major Projects Association, and I'm delighted to be talking to Ruth Murray-Webster and Penny Pullan on the subject of making risk management work. Let's kick off with a question drawn from the title of your new book, which coincidentally is called Making Risk Management Work. The title suggests that maybe it's not working, and I wondered if that is indeed your view, and if so, why isn't it working? So,
yeah, you're absolutely right. The title absolutely implies that risk management is not working as well as it could, and particularly in groups of people in our organisations, whether that's a family or a major project or large or small organisation. So yes, it does imply that, but I think it also draws from a place of saying that as people, we are actually really good risk managers. We wouldn't still be here if we weren't. We've evolved to become so, and we do have some inherent skills. There are some inherent challenges, but actually when you start to get groups of people together to think about risk in a consistent way, then the whole thing can unravel. So making risk management work in organisations, and particularly in large organisations like major projects, is everywhere I look really problematical. Some are doing better than others, but it's a really tricky thing to get right. So yes, and I guess that through this book we take one aspect of that, but one that Penny and I, both believe is really fundamental.
Excellent, good. So, Penny, what's your take on that?
Well, my take is to say that aspect is the subtitle of our book, which is actually it's really important to engage people to identify, own, and manage risk. And if you just have a process or a series of checklists or whatever, how good the process, how good the checklist, unless you can engage people as individuals and as teams and groups to really identify the appropriate risks, to own those risks and to manage them throughout the project and be able to manage beyond throughout the life cycle as well of whatever it is that you're working on. That's really important.
So I mean, you're right, and it's about making it matter, making it important to people. If people don't care, then good luck with your risk management.
It is important because if you don't manage the risks, then how can you actually deliver this thing you're trying to deliver?
Yeah, indeed. It's very apparent at the moment with everything that's been going on in government, the need to kind of reassure stakeholders that actually it's fine. Don't worry, we're a safe set of hands. And I wondered, in risk management terms, what's the balance between reassuring stakeholders on the one hand, but also on the other hand, making sure that stakeholders understand and own their part of the risk. Might be seen as the residual risks, but anyway, own the risk. What's your view on that?
Yeah, if people don't own the risks, then surely the assurance is false. Oh, everything's going to be fine, said yet again, and the people who are not involved and don't know the details thinking, hang on, but is this just going to be like the last one was?
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, that does raise the question of what they understand by owning the risk. Do you think they understand what that means?
There's layers of this, isn't there? But in terms of senior decision makers, then they're investing, the organisation's scarce resources into something, whether that's an operation or it's something to do with change. And so, fundamentally, anybody who, has got the authority to invest the scarce resources of another organisation is the primary risk taker. They might not see it that way, but, all of my logic says there's not another answer. Working with that, I think it's incumbent on all of us who support those people to help them understand what the range of possible outcomes might be. And, to your original question, and this sort of balance between reassuring and encouraging. I mean, I would not be reassured by anybody who told me it's okay, nothing can go wrong here, I've got it, like, really, because the world's more complex than that, maybe on a simple task, but in something that's a complex undertaking. So I think to reassure, well, where does our confidence come from? So assurance as a thing would always talk about, well, we're providing confidence to stakeholders. That assurance needs to be risk-based, but so by definition, I think we need to help people understand a bigger picture about the uncertainty that would matter in the situation, and to help people, however much they want to fixate on single points and single answers and binary solutions, really encouraging them to sort of be able to hold that uncertainty and that ambiguity without becoming paralyzed in their decision making. Maybe there's some education with the media too, of course, who just are driving answers, which is just a joke.
Yes, yeah.
Personal view.
No, that's great. And listening to you, I mean, it strikes me that we really need to be far more inclusive in our risk management. Holding the risk to ourselves is not good if we're protecting somebody else, or if we think we're protecting somebody else. Yeah. And that even goes to government and citizens. Actually, absolutely. Transparency and saying to citizens, we can do this, but there are these risks associated with it.
And it's great, isn't it? So I think we took a big step forward actually in the pandemic, where risk became much more a language of the people. And whether it's people like David Spiegelhalter or a lot of the media around, just helping us get our head around likelihoods, probabilities. I think that the pandemic create an opportunity for us there to sort of educate more widely, and I'm hoping there's a bit of a role on that, and ever the optimist.
Yes, I mean, that's fascinating, and I think the pandemic, it demonstrated how we can normalize things that we're quite happy to ignore risks. When they become an issue, we manage to deal with them, even something as terrifying as the pandemic. But while it's a risk, we somehow just don't want to talk about it. Major projects these days, they are huge, involving billions of pounds and stretching over many years. I think Sellafield kind of takes the biscuit with its 100-year program for cleaning up the nuclear waste around Sellafield. That brings a whole level of uncertainty. Who can anticipate what's going to happen in 10 years' time, let alone 100 years' time? And I wondered whether risk management in that context needs to adapt from risk management in the everyday context. How do we deal with those kinds of scales and those kinds of uncertainties?
I've got a couple of ideas that I'm happy to kick off with. I mean, first of all, Jonathan, and anybody who's listening, to this who's involved in major projects would know that we use that term as a bit of a catch-all for some very large endeavours that are still temporary organisations. But many major projects are organisations. They're much bigger than many companies. And so there's something that is about how do we escalate, how do we delegate, how do we aggregate, how do we organise governance and decision making to make sure that information flows are effective and efficient. And I think although that's complex to do, and the nature of the risks, might be technical, might be socio-political, it could be, macro contextual things, might be within the organization. The more we can simplify our language and the way we talk about things in a common way, I think the easier it is to get that more transparent flow of information. So that would be one thing. The other thing that I would say is, of course, a lot of major projects are what we would technically call programs, and therefore are, in terms of their organization design, are inherently iterative. And so what we're saying is, no, it's only reasonable to see out this far. So we're going to get very specific and look at risks to objectives here, whilst at the same time knowing there's a much big picture and that there are some risks to some objectives that are further out here. So I think we need to become better at dealing with multiple time frames in the way we think about risk. And I'm sure lots of people listening will know that if they look at the risk register, risk database of their organization, all the risks are either issues already or are just about to happen. Their proximity is right on the end of the nose. And things that might happen, but for a long time we're too busy fighting fires to think about those.
Yes, bang on. And Penny, I saw recently somebody playing with the idea of postcards from the future. So kind of imagining that you're receiving a postcard from the future, which has a picture of a possible future on it, and then maybe some language on the back. I wonder if you've got any techniques in terms of facilitation and that kind of thing, is how you get people to imagine and engage with the future and think about what might be happening.
Yeah, there are a few. I mean, it's heading back in time now, but the film Back to the Future with the DeLorean car with the doors that open sideways instead of the normal way cars do, sort of inviting people to imagine that they're stepping into that and setting a time for maybe the end of the program, maybe 5-10 years out, and then traveling forward. And if their program has been a real success and they get out, what would they see, what would they hear, what would they read that would tell them that it was so that sort of technique can be really, really helpful. And then to look back from there at all the things that went well, and I suppose that's the outcome of having managed risk well to get to the end, to achieve your objective. So things like that can be helpful. What I am finding, though, is that that new people coming in may not actually have seen that film, and it may not make much sense to them. So there's lots of different things to think about. Maybe getting into the Doctor Who TARDIS might be something that works better with younger people. But lots of ways you can bring in fun and imagination, but that really taps into the part of your brain that can really be helpful in thinking longer term.
It's I really like that example, Penny, also because the idea of the pre-mortem's been around for donkey's years, but it's quite popular at the minute. I've seen lots and lots of organizations using pre-mortems, but of course they use pre-mortems in the negative. It's the disastrous Daily Mail article, and actually flipping it to a positive future and what would have needed to go well is another entirely valid, and I would argue better way at getting at risks than doing it on the downside.
It's also really useful because if you start looking at things in a negative way, you end up with everybody go, it weighs down heavily. It's gone wrong, that's gone wrong, there are all these problems. Really weighs people down. It doesn't keep them at their best, at their most excited, at their most with everything firing. And that's what you want. You want people at their best, thinking at their best, being at their best. So often don't just look at what are the problems, but look at it with a more sort of appreciative inquiry way. What could work? What could we build on? Yeah, give that a go and see, instead of a pre-mortem, and see what difference you get.
Yes, I think those are both great examples. I mean, pre-mortems can be very useful. So I'm glad you mentioned them, Ruth. But I think, Penny, your point's bang on. And it occurs to me that in terms of measuring progress and encouraging continued engagement, if you think in the way that you're advocating, then you can maybe celebrate, because you can say, look, this is what we think will happen. This is how success will appear. And you can say, oh, we've managed that. We should celebrate that, because the difficulty I find with a lot of projects is it's kind of, we've achieved that. We just take that as a granted, instead of saying, wow, we've achieved that. You keep people going. It's challenging. Yeah.
Very motivating. I mean, even little tiny things like a handwritten thank you card, if you're working in a virtual or hybrid team, just sending something little like that as a way of marking and celebrating can be huge.
Yeah, there was a great training video back in the early 1990s called The Sid Story, where they talked about planned spontaneous recognition. And the idea was that you came in, and I think it's a great idea. You come in and you look for something in the way that your team is behaving. If you don't see it, you don't say anything. But if you see it, you actually call it out and you say, wow, do you realize what you've done? This is fantastic. So having that kind of positive mindset, I think, is really useful for a risk manager, for any manager, actually, to look for the positive as well as kind of thinking about.
And it's tweaking the culture as well. So perhaps making it more encouraging. Perhaps, I wonder if people are more likely to be open and honest about risks and to trust each other in that more open, supportive culture.
It's true. Yeah. Certainly in the work that David Helson and I have done on risk culture, then, one of 4 key planks of that is how you recognise and reward good risk management. And that is all of the things you've been talking about. One, you've got to be open for it, you've got to be looking for it, but also it's about recognising and rewarding the anticipatory and preventive behaviour. You can't wait until the outcome, because many more things will have happened. You have to reward the good decision that's a risk-based decision. So, lots that organisations can do better in that regard.
Yes, yeah. And that plays to one of my particular bugbears, I guess one of my prejudices, which is about, organisations that are very risk averse and tend to stick to the status quo and ignore the risk associated with not doing something. They think, oh, that's terribly risky, we can't do that. That could, and they never say, well, what would happen if we didn't do something? And I think, using your technique, Penny, they might actually be able to say, actually, here's the opportunity. This is the opportunity associated with doing this. I have one last question, which is the sort of magic wand question. And it's one of those cheating questions. So if you wanted to make risk management work and you could only change one thing in organizations, what one thing would that be? And I'll go to you first, Penny.
Jonathan, one thing: there is no magic bullet to make risk management work.
That's great. That's a really good response. Yes.
There are loads of things, but there's no one thing. There's a whole wide range of things that will help.
I'll play the game and say, well, if there was one thing, then I think the one thing is better conversations about risk. And that means as addressing some of the language that we use. I know lots of people have said in the past, if we could just stop using the R word, the risk word, and uncertainty doesn't quite cut it. But actually, I've noticed many more organisations now using a different R word, the resilience word, that resonates more, that if resilience is the outcome of doing risk well, individually, collectively. So whatever we need to do with our language, to just engage people and help them have just suspend judgment for a little bit longer, listen to a different point of view, be open and have a better conversation about risk. And I think if that's happening, top to bottom, then that will be transformative.
Yes.
Whereas so much of what we do closes down the conversation.
Thank you both very much. That was tremendous. And you can see, Penny, if you'd like to say something and put the book up again.
This is our book, Making Risk Management Work, Engaging People to Identify, Own and Manage Risk, by Ruth Murray-Webster and Penny Pullan, and it's out in second edition.